outline. Yeah, okay, we are just giving a brief outline of our work on evaluation and citizen science. So I'm Barbara Kieslinger, and then my colleague Teresa will also speak. We work for the Center for Social Innovation in Vienna, Austria. And so to give you just a little bit of the background of where we come from, or why do we do evaluation, or how long we have started. We were invited to one of the first citizen science projects funded by the European Commission quite some time ago. And in 2014, one of the end results was this white paper on citizen science. So we were working there on a policy document. And that was also for us pretty new concept then. But since then, it has evolved quite a lot. And so for evaluation, we then developed in another context a framework, which we will present a bit more in detail on how citizen science can be evaluated. And we also applied it in practice in some of our projects. For example, one that was on air quality with people putting sensors in their houses or outside their houses. So we go from policy to theory and to practice, what we cover in our activities on evaluation. And when we look at what is already out there in terms of evaluation, there are different frameworks, when adding frameworks to it. There are frameworks, for example, one is this logic framework model that comes also from a different area where people look into the activities, what is the outcomes, what is the output and longer term output. So it comes more from developmental policies. Another aspect that is very much covered already in citizen science is looking at, in terms of evaluation, is looking at learning output. So quite a lot of people already applied a framework that has been provided by American colleagues on how to evaluate specifically the learning outcomes of citizen science. What do people learn when they participate in citizen science? And we have also recently come up with a publication where we summarize a little bit the different aspects, where we give an overview of what is already developed and a little bit also an outlook on what is at the moment still, evolving, what are trends in evaluation. And we give also some very concrete examples in this book. So there's the reference there as well for that very recent book on the science of citizen science. Now, if we talk a little bit more into this evaluation and our framework that we developed, we are looking usually at citizen science projects on the process level, process and feasibility, and on the other hand, on the output and impact level, or outcome and impact level. So in the process and feasibility level, this can be used during the project or even as a planning tool to consider certain aspects of citizen science. And the other part is more about really assessing the impact or the potential impact and the effects and outcomes. And there we divide it again into three different areas. The one is the scientific part of it. So the scientific objectives of a citizen science project, and how the process is organized also in terms of sharing data, cooperation and synergies, and what are outcomes again. In the participant side, that's the second one. We look more into, we try to see the learning aspects are covered there. As we saw before, there is already a framework for evaluating what the learning outcomes of a certain project, or how far are people involved? Do they have different ways of engagement during the research process? And also, how are they, for example, motivated or want to continue citizen science aspects? And the third one, the socio-ecological and socioeconomic part, we look more at the broader context. So, for example, can also other people who are not direct participants follow the project, and can they see the value of the project, or are there collaborations with other institutions, with NGOs or with policymakers that are in the context of this project? And what are the impact of this? So is it affecting society at all? Is it affecting our natural environment, or other economic benefits? Some projects even have economic benefits. And for all of these, we defined questions to ask, questions that would give you indications of whether this is the case or not. And just to summarize a bit more, so this, the one hand, the process evaluation can be used more as a continuous reflective process during the project, and you may also adapt certain strategies in the project when you find out that, for example, communication with your target group does not work well. So you would assess that during the project, and you can still, if it's early enough, adapt to it and improve it, and improve your methods also, maybe fine-tune them. And for the impact part, it's really more looking about the outcomes and the impact. And often it is also not so easy in our projects. They're often financed for 2-3 years, and sometimes the impact comes much later. So we're also trying to think about indications or possible logical chains that would say, yes, that's an indication that this and that will happen, at least in the future, because maybe the time frame is too short to achieve it during the project runtime. So these are the broad two areas, and according to the 3 levels. And Teresa will talk a bit more about these 3 dimensions there.
Hello. So what we did is we looked in how far citizen science projects that already exist have already evaluated one of these dimensions, like the scientific or the dimension, or the individual learning dimension, or the broader dimension. And I will give examples here, because then it might become more clear what is meant by evaluating, for instance, the scientific dimension. What are indicators that are collected here? So for instance, if we want to look on the impact of a project on the scientific level, one of the most often indicators that we find is this number of scientific publications. And you might be all aware of that in many research institutions, you have to have scientific publications. So this is also tracked. So do citizen science projects result in scientific publications? And we see that this is the case, and especially in the field of more the natural sciences, we find a lot of a higher number of scientific publications, like in ornithology, astronomy, but also but also in projects that happen on digital platforms like Galaxy Zoo, for instance. We find lower numbers of scientific publications still in the humanities, but this might also be due to the fact that projects that have work in the humanities have maybe other priorities than just doing scientific publications. They might rather publish their outcomes in a newspaper or on the television or other social media to have a wider audience and to influence what's happening locally. Other outcome indicators that relate to the scientific dimensions that we find are, for instance, do the relationships between the society and the scientific community change, being more trustful? So is there more trust between these communities as they work together? Or is there if they start to analyze data together and scientific findings together, might there be new insights. There's a new capacity because there are several perspectives coming into this analysis. Or for instance, scientists, do they have increased science communication skills because they work with the public? So these are other indicators that could be looked at to see in how far citizen science has an impact on science. Then we have the participants dimension. This is the dimension where we look at the individual people that are involved in citizen science projects. And Barbara mentioned that the most important outcome here that we can find in literature is the learning outcome. So people learn about the topic of investigation, for instance, about bird life, if it's a birding project, or about air quality things. But they also learn about the scientific process, about, for instance, that there's a research question, that there are data collected, that this data are analyzed. So there are two types of learning. And this learning is often happening rather informally in the community itself, when the citizens start to talk with each other, or to start to talk with the scientists. And it can also be stimulated, for instance, via trainings, where the citizens receive training before they are involved in the scientific activity. And then there are, of course, more aspects related to learning. So if people learn, for instance, what about the air pollution in their region, and what is maybe the reason for this air pollution, and how they can fight against it, they might feel empowered. They might take more care for their own environment. They might increase their own activism, yeah, and they might also learn about their own values and interests, in how far they are ready to change their behavior and so on. So these are additional things that can be looked at. And Barbara mentioned this evaluation framework for learning from our American colleagues. And we also have a direct link to this at the end of this presentation, where you can find very clear guidelines and also questionnaires that help you to set up this kind of evaluation. And then in the last dimension, Barbara, could you? Yeah, thank you. This is the most difficult one to evaluate, because here we try to look not only at individuals, but also at the regions they live in, the communities they live in. Does the project have any impact on that? And here we rather see that individuals who are involved in the project then take a step forward and become actors in their region. So they act as promoters for the topic in their social networks. They talk about it, they try to motivate people. They might raise their political activities. They might altogether increase their capacity to react to things that are happening in their local community. And there are, for instance, very nice air quality citizen science projects, where we see already very nice results of this collection of air quality data that result in a really influence on political decisions, where new streets are built and so on, where we see that this results in increased discussions between the citizens and the political decision makers also, and in a higher sense of community. So these are aspects that we can look at in this dimension. And then we said what might be tools to evaluate the outcomes of your projects. And here, most often, or very often, we find classical surveys that are distributed, for instance, to the participants, like I was referring to this learning outcome survey. We find interviews that are conducted with the participants, but also with maybe political decision makers who tell you if the project had an impact. We find, of course, the more playful approach of narrative interviews, where we not only have interviews, but also photos or storyboards. So we find kind of embedded assessment where the citizens, as part of their task, do, for instance, fill in a quiz, and then we can see, okay, when they fill in the quiz, we can see, okay, they understand now the topic better. Or we find also that some projects start to analyze the discussions of the citizens who are involved in their projects and see if they start to use wording that is related to this new topic. And if we can see that they use new terms that show that they have an increased knowledge. So there are different practices and tools applied.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. And then just to wrap up our presentation, like here is just this example again of our project where it was a citizen science project on air pollution. And as you see there were people hanging up low-cost sensors outside their house or outside a school, and we were doing the evaluation there. So what did we look at? We looked at the effects that this had on their individual participants. So we sent them a surveys where we asked them in questionnaires or interviews before they did that and after that, and what changed for them. But we also looked at the effects on the region. And in some, it had quite some important effects because there was also a political impact. And with that data, it's one of our partners, they had created real impact and tried to change policy, so reducing traffic, for example. And we have summarized that in one of our papers there. But it was quite interesting to cover the different aspects there. In this project, and there were already many. I think we even in one of our conferences we met somebody from the Ukraine who was also building their own low-cost sensor for air quality measuring. Yes, and just to wrap up again, this is just what we would like to, if you want to dive deeper into it, some further resources that we can recommend. There is, the European Citizen Science Association, where there's also a group on evaluation or discussing evaluation more intensively. There is the online platform EU Citizen Science. I'm pretty sure you have heard of that already, but it's a good place for finding resources. And then there are certain projects in funded by the European Commission who are dedicated also to evaluation or impact assessment, like this MIX project. They are developing another evaluation framework right now, as far as we are aware, and they build also on the framework that we previously presented. And then there is the Inspires project, which is, again, it offers a self-assessment tool that can already be used. We have, again, what we mentioned before, the Cornell Lab guidelines for evaluating the learning outcomes for citizen scientists. And another project, which is the Action Project, which is, again, also developing or offering a toolkit and even masterclasses for evaluation. So, and I think that is already the end. And we're happy to share, of course, all the slides, and happy also to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teresa and Barbara. That was very concise yet insightful. Thank you very much. So
I can see that there's a question from Claire.
Yes.
And she wanted to know how we measure content analysis in qualitative and quantitative terms. Well, the example that we have shown here on this slide, this was a project that was an online project, and in this online activities, people had also a discussion forum. And what they did then is they looked into these discussion threads and counted the number, counted how often people are using specific words that are related to the research. So for instance, if we have the air quality project, for instance, we would start to count, I don't know, ozone and NO2 maybe, and then measurement and maybe also reference stations. And so we would look at the words that show that people start to discuss in a way about the topic that is increasingly mature and uses increasingly more complex and words, and it shows that there was a knowledge increase, for instance. So this would be more in quantitative terms, but we also use content analysis, for instance, for our interviews. When we do interviews with participants and we ask them an open question like, what was your personal outcome of the project? And then we would just let people answer what it is, and then we would start to in the content analysis tool to group these aspects and see how often did people mention that they learned something, how often did they mention that they talked to somebody else about it, how often did they say that they now read more often, I don't know, news related to this topic because they are more interested. So this is another way of how we would use content analysis together with interviews, for instance. Does this answer your question? Okay. Any other questions?
Please notice that they mentioned the Science of Citizen Science, and that's an open access book. It's also within the resources in the Padlet that we create for the course. And yes, also the projects that they show in their slides, they are also part of our Padlet. So you can scroll there and get the links directly, apart of getting the presentation, of course. I think that, Luca, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe a short question, maybe I missed. How long was the project going on? A month, years, or how long was it?
Which one?
You mean the air quality project?
Yes.
Or which one? Yeah.
The air quality.
For 3 years, yes. But we had the different testing sites. So it was in Spain, in Italy, and in Germany. And the first in Austria. And the first year was only in Spain. It was kind of the testing year because it was about ozone, specifically about ozone pollution. And we could only do that during summer periods. So it was always running, just the measuring time itself was only during the hot periods in summer. And it was one summer in Spain only, and the other 2 years in Austria.
Hello? Yeah, thank you. And a few more questions, if I may.
Yes, sure.
So the results of the study, did they inform the local authorities, or how did you use the results afterwards? So the project was concluded, ended. What happened afterwards?
Yeah. There we had different results in the different regions. This depended very much on the players that were involved. For instance, in the Spanish region, we had a grassroots movement involved, an environmental organization, and they very actively communicated the results of the project to the political decision makers, and not only to those, but also to the media. And when the media took up the topic, because they realized that media like the topic very much if citizens get involved. And the media started to take up the topic, and then also the political decision makers were attracted to this problem. And then they started not only to work in the specific region that was suffering under the higher ozone pollution, but also the region where the ozone pollution came from, which makes the project very complex, because pollution often comes from another region than where the people suffer. So they had campaigns running, and they had impact on the local legislation there. But this was because there was a really strong involvement of this environmental agent organization who have also experience in doing that, in taking up issues towards political decision makers. And for instance, in Austria, we had political decisions, so we had local local ministers even involved in putting up measurement devices in their public places to support the project. But they have been much more cautious in communicating the results of the project, the high ozone pollution, to their local community, because they were afraid that this might be a disadvantage compared to other communities if they talk about their pollution and others do not. So it has a very strong political dimension. Then they said, okay, then you have to put up devices everywhere, because we don't want to be the only ones who talk about that and be transparent about that. So this becomes really more complex then, but we try to summarize all these lessons learned that we had also from the different settings in the different regions in one paper, if you're more interested in that tries to look into how you can then drive sustainable impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, in German it's called Verstetigung, but I would say, what is I don't know how you call it in English. How do you secure the long-term sustainable results of the study? So it's 3 years, you did something, you had a study, you conducted, you achieved some results, and what happens afterwards?
Yeah, that's it. So during the project, we had this first impact on political decision makers, and then what was in this region that has really worked well, the Verwaltung, the local ministry, they tried to organize their own ozone measurement devices, because they didn't have them in the region, to put that up and to make it also publicly available, the data, to their citizens. So this is something that was even after the project continuing. So they were aware of the problem due to the project, due to the appearance in media, due to the involvement of people. And they said, okay, so we have to keep that up and running and follow up on this. And that's why it's also good to have this environmental organization there, because they now keep these things up and running.
My maybe general question to the whole organization: are there any techniques or methods or best practices how to secure the results, how to secure the longevity of the project, of the results after the project is done? Do you understand what I mean? It's not only to you, Barbara and Teresa, but also maybe to Andrea and Dorte. What happens 5 years after the project is done? What happens 10 years after the project is done? The money is not there, the people are less interested, the politics are less interested, they're re-elected, the organization maybe disappeared. Who pushed this agenda forward? What happens afterwards? How to secure the sustainability, how to make it sustainable?
I think this is one of the key questions that we still have to answer, and that is very much discussed in actual working groups around citizen science. And in some projects, sustainability maybe that are very much linked to a scientific question that needs to be answered. This is more easy to answer than these citizen science projects where the society is really the driver, and we want to have societal impact, because then sustainability is such a key aspect. And there's no easy answer to that. At least I would not be aware of it.
I would say the one strategy is to distribute the legs of the project in many partners. So they are also, they feel that they own the project. The sense of ownership is distributed among others, and it's not so centralized. So they don't expect only that one organization will push the project and the results and the application forward. And also, I think as much as possible, policy work and connecting with the local territories and the people that are their leaders at different levels is also very crucial to show them. So it's a lot of advocacy. I would say that advocacy is very important.
And maybe just add here the open data sources. So more and more projects are filling in their data into open data, shared open data platforms. And especially, I think for the air quality, there are already some initiatives where they're even cooperating with authorities, and the European Environmental Agency, as far as I know, they also have citizen science now in their strategies. So there, I think there is some kind of more sustainability aspect to it if it is shared in these open repositories. I was just sharing because I mean, I can't read it, the website, but I just want to share with you because it's from the Ukraine, the person that approached us and who did this initiative also on air quality in Ukraine. And yeah.
May I?
Yes, Mariana, please.
Yes, hello, Sharon. I just have such a question. As all your projects, or some of them, are like include this the key aspect like a sustainability. The question is, are there any like a synergy with other projects? For example, ECI. I'm not sure that you heard about it, like this International Climate Initiative. No. Okay. If not with this project, maybe with other like environmental or ecological projects. I mean, do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, this is, you mean that that projects should seek the cooperation with big networks and
yes, so something like that, cooperation or synergy of your activities, like because to reach the overall goal, I mean, in the context of climate changes and so on.
Mm-hmm. And that's where it links also to the SDGs that were mentioned before, right? Where this can become more concrete. Yeah, sure. I mean, this is another topic. For instance, there are also working groups where in the air quality sector we have this air working group on citizen science project in air quality who try to gather all the knowledge that they have in the different projects and to bring this all together one step forward and to do also some kind of let's say communication work towards political decision makers on a European level or on other levels. So sure, that's a good point.
Yeah, and the global partnerships, for example, that are also just being built now, as far as I know. So there are initiatives where either according to topics or so that projects are joining forces. Also for recently, there was another ECSA group created in the healthcare, for example, you know, in medical aspects and in healthcare issues. So yeah, there are, at least from ECSA, I know that there are quite some working groups on different topics where projects try to join forces.
Can I ask, do we still have time, Andrea? Yes. So how do you...
I would change a little bit the program, but go ahead.
I understand that Citizen Science Project work closely with Horizon Europe. They get financing from those sources a lot. And the requirement in the European Union in terms of Green Deal is to make everything accessible, open access to everything, sustainable with environmental and social impact. How does it fit into industrial reality, economic reality of European Union? Does industry participate in those efforts, or do we have only government, European Union initiatives, and economy is just living on the next planet, on the other planet? Do you understand the companies? I mean,
yeah, I mean, I don't know, from the small area of projects that I have been involved in, this small view that I can probably provide on it, it is there is industry involved. So it's either SMEs, like small companies who also benefit from the funding, or they would have a special focus also on certain areas that we focus there. And then there is an interest also from the broad economy, but I would feel more in the sense of, okay, of let's see what research is doing, you know, a little bit observing, a little bit dipping into it. And I don't know how far this has already come to a point. I mean, there are, of course, companies who subscribe to it, but I think in the research part where we are, it's often still a bit more exploring and seeing, and they have their units who are responsible for sustainability, for corporate social identity, for all these things. And so they do participate there, but it would be hard for me to say in how far for large enterprises, it really penetrates their business model, so to say, or their practices. But they do participate.
Mm-hmm. Because you mentioned, for example, healthcare project, medical project, and now in this time with the corona, so there is a research, there is observation, there is a tracking of people, for example, or understanding people movement behaviors, and that has to be somehow utilized by the companies in drug production, drug manufacturing, or logistics or infrastructure, whatever it is. So the question is, maybe it's a rhetorical question. Is there a tight collaboration between policy and industry? In Austria, for example, you're from Austria, how it's looking in Austria in terms in current situations? Well, it's a rhetorical question.
But it's an interesting one to look more into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One that might be also very interesting, it's just because we have been working on this before and we recently published something on this. We had a project that we would rather label citizen innovation than real citizen science, because it was more an innovation project in the healthcare sector and with the maker communities. So we had makers from different parts of the world connected who were doing designing and making, fabricating things for tools, support things for people with disabilities. And suddenly when COVID came, they started producing for hospitals. So they started producing intubation boxes. They started producing the typical face shield and you know, spare parts for valves for again for intubation. So when the global distribution channels broke down and they couldn't deliver straight away, these small local maker places all started producing and deliver, and sometimes working even with hospitals, also with doctors together, and producing personal protective equipment and other stuff and delivering it directly there. So there was a strong impact actually, and it was not the large manufacturers, but it was really a very small on-demand production for things that were needed. So that was super interesting actually to see that happen.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to keep on with our program. I really appreciate, Teresa and Barbara, that you had the time to share your experience here and be with us. You are invited to stay with us as long as you can. I will stop the recording here.